Welcome to She Said Homestead, the podcast that explores homesteading from a range of perspectives. We're Sage and Mickayla, two homesteaders, each with unique experiences, properties, and future goals for our homesteads. We're discussing various homesteading topics, sharing our personal experiences as women working full-time who are managing homesteads as well, and shining a light on the stories of other inspiring homesteaders.
Before we dive in, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. And if you enjoy our podcast, please consider leaving a review. It really helps us grow and share these homesteading stories with even more people.
Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. I am Sage from Terra Nova Acres.
And I am Mickayla from Calico Cow Acres, and we both have homesteads in Western North Carolina.
Today, we're going to be talking about something that homesteaders should talk about, which is managing burnout. However good or bad we might be at that, we at least have some experience and some insight to share. But before we get into that, tell me a little bit about your week.
This is the perfect week to be talking about burnout. This week has been crazy. It's been on and off thunderstorm or supposed to be thunderstorming for like the last 2 weeks straight. And I never know if it's actually going to happen or not, so I can't plan anything. And that is so stressful. So I also decided this past week that it would be a smart idea to get a new freezer because we're going into preserving season. But then this is the smart part. I also decided that along with that freezer, I was going to do a bunch of meal prep because it was supposed to storm, right? Right? That makes sense. But then all weekend it was like teasing me like it might storm, but then it was not actually storming. And so I was kind of wavering on whether I should start my meal prep projects, or if I should go outside and not really doing a whole lot. So I finally started my meal prepping really late, and I started it on Sunday instead of Saturday. And so I'm still working on those meal prep projects, and it is Wednesday of the following week. And I am like still trying to finish my video on that for our YouTube channel. And also everything in my garden needs to be planted this week. And it won't stop raining now. So there's a lot going on, and it's absolute chaos.
Yeah, welcome to spring on a homestead. Spring on a homestead is always crazy.
So I got the biggest freezer that I could possibly find for a decent price. And it is massive. It's like bigger than my fridge in the kitchen. And it's a stand-up freezer. It's like an upright. So it has shelves and everything. I'm like, I'm going to load this thing up. So I planned out a bunch of meal preps from old salvage store, like canned foods, like canned organic tomato sauce and whatnot that we had gotten. I never got around to making sloppy joe sauce or barbecue sauce over the winter. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do that now. We're going to can those things, but I'm also going to make freezer stuff to go with it. So we went to the salvage store, loaded up. We spent like $120 or something, $130. And our freezer is like full now. Like I literally filled up the freezer already. So I did, I think 15 or 16 jars worth of barbecue, like homemade barbecue sauce. And we did 2 different kinds. We did like a Sweet Baby Ray's style and then a Stubbs style. So like a more smoky, less sweet one. And we've been trying to think of names for them. And so we named the Sweet Baby Ray's one Sweet Baby Taste. And we still can't think of a name for the other one. I think we might call it Bubby Q because we call Moo, our cat, Bubby. Like that's his name. So that might be the Stubbs style one. But we made 15 or 16 jars of that. I did, I think, 10 meals worth of sloppy joe sauce, which is like 30 nights of dinners for us. And then alongside that, I cooked lentils and froze them into packages for Taylor, and obviously in the freezer. And then we got a 10-pound ground beef log from the salvage store, and I put that into 1-pound packages for sloppy joes for me. I made gallon bags for like a handful of like teriyaki skewer meals on the grill. I made, I think, 3 or 4 dozen eggs worth of pasta, duck eggs, worth of pasta for the freezer, just like pasta rounds to roll out in the future. I made 4 dozen muffins. I did so many things. I still have to do like McDonald's style hash browns. Taylor calls them potato patties. I don't know why. That's just like what we call them. But they're hash browns. And I think that's it, but I'm not 100% sure. Might be it.
That's a lot of food.
A lot going on.
Can you meal prep for me? I'm really struggling with that right now.
Sure. Bring food over and I'll make it. What were you up to this week?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is the storm that came through today, which it's been, in the forecast, thunderstorms, rain, so didn't think much of it. And then, what was it? Like 1:30, golf ball size hail started coming down, and not like a few, like a ton. The yard looked like it snowed. And my first thought was my car, my car that I just bought a few months ago. I thought for sure the soft top was going to be ripped. I thought for sure the windshield was just going to be beaten to pieces. And so I did try to run out there really quick. The thing you're not supposed to do, go run out on a hailstorm, especially when they're coming down that hard and they're that big. But I was like, I have got to at least put something on the hood of the car, because if that turns into Swiss cheese, I can replace a windshield, I can fix other stuff, but the actual metal body, I want to do something. Regret that decision, kind of. I'd probably do it again. Because I have almost no hail damage on my car, which, thank goodness. But I did, one clocked me right in the horribly wrong spot on my elbow. And I thought that it hit me in the hand, because I immediately just felt that you hit your elbow really hard and it shoots up through your forearm and you feel it in your hand and your fingers. So I still can't totally feel all of my fingers. That tendon is definitely swollen. I'm sure it'll go down. But that was eventful, and that same storm, right after that ended, I was like, I gotta go make sure that chickens aren't knocked out and bleeding, or because that could take out a chicken so easily, or make sure the sheep are okay, no one's bleeding. That was my first thought was, oh my god, if they got stuck in that, or if something hit them just right, bad news. But all the animals are okay. Thank goodness. The garden is very not okay. The tomatoes took most of the damage. I think I'm gonna have to replant half of my tomatoes, at least. Beans took some damage too. I'm not as worried about those. Those are pretty easy to plant and come back. Whereas tomatoes, you start those 6 weeks before last frost and you baby them and they get, it's not as easy to replace a tomato plant as it is a green bean. But everything else is okay, more or less. Some pumpkins got shredded. That's replaceable. But just with all the rain that we've had, the lower half of my garden is basically a pond, and so it's been kind of an issue, and I've been aware that area ponds, but it hasn't been like this. It hasn't been to the point that it was drowning my seedlings, which now it's at the point that it's drowning my seedlings with this weather that we've had. So now my weekend plans have turned from getting flowers planted, which I'm still going to try to get a few out. But basically, I'm going to be digging a couple trenches in that shallow area, pouring sand and gravel in there to make French drains, essentially. And then also mounding up my planting areas in those beds. So doing two things, trying to install something to help the water drain away faster, but also increasing the elevation for the plants so that they have at least some rooting space that's above water. And that's stressful. So that's more emotional burnout. The physical energy hasn't been expended on that yet, but I'm stressed about it now. Other than that, it's been keeping sheep moving, which I spent like half a day on that, just moving their paddock because I gotta weed whack and lop a bunch of stuff in the woods to get them into the paddocks that they're going through now, which is a whole effort. And I've been trying to keep up with the house a little bit better because from the past 2 years that I've done this, I know that if the garden is a mess, if the house is a mess, if my eating is a mess, then I am a mess. And so trying to at least have some sort of restful space, however practical or impractical that may be, is my goal. At least progress on it, not perfection. Just getting better about it. So I've spent a lot of time organizing and cleaning and that sort of stuff. And it has made me feel better. I will say that. So lots going on.
Do you want to tell everybody how much sand you had to buy for that and how much sand you're going to have to bring up the hill?
So I bought 400 pounds of sand, which is 8 50-pound bags. That's what you can buy them in, which looks a lot smaller than you'd think. Like a 50-pound bag of sand is not a large bag of sand. It's I don't know. I'm bad at dimensions, but yeah, I did drag that through Lowe's. I got a lot of looks, and then loading that into the back of my Jeep was interesting. You know, I was like, okay, gotta have good form. Like, I cannot afford to throw my back out right now. So I'm like crouching down, getting it off of the cart, and then like moving it over, and then being like, okay, lift with your legs. Then just like chucking it into my trunk. So yeah, that is now down at the house, but it has to get all the way up the hill through the pasture to the garden. But yeah, if I can carry it on my shoulder, I'm good.
I'm
That'll
convinced
be
that
an
bags of
effort.
sand weigh a lot more than 50 pounds. It's like so concentrated. They feel so much heavier than they actually are. I don't have
They're
a hard
dense.
time lifting heavy things. I have a hard time carrying bags of sand and like concrete and stuff.
Yeah.
It's not easy. Good luck with that.
Homestead CrossFit, you know. So on that note, let's talk a little bit about burnout. I am curious if you have a particular moment in your memory, specifically related to homesteading, that is your most burnt out, your most fried, when you feel like you were stretched the thinnest.
I do. There are actually a lot of them, but if I have to think of like one in particular, I would say late May, June last year, so 2023, would be the peak stress for me. And honestly, it didn't really have to do so much with the homestead as it did with my job at that time. So it kind of all came to a peak all at once, where I was still trying to prep our garden for our first year growing. I was trying to plant things in our garden as I was trying to get beds prepped, which like they were going from straight clay being tilled and planted in like every day after work. My job was having me work like 60 plus hours. They were asking me to work a lot more hours than they should have been. They were very much like abusing that salary privilege. And we were trying to build the chicken coop and get that going. We were expecting chicks in like 3 weeks from then. It was just a lot all at once. We had people coming, like family members and friends coming to visit us at that same time. I ended up quitting that job very spontaneously in the midst of that without having something else lined up. Yeah, it was just a lot. Like, I could think of other times that I was really stressed out during the homestead thing, but like during the first year of getting our homestead going. But that time was like everything needed to go in the garden. The garden wasn't ready. The chickens were coming. The chicken coop wasn't ready. We didn't have anywhere for them to go. We weren't experienced with them. People were coming to visit. It was just a lot.
Yeah, that sounds like a perfect storm. I can see why that would be the moment that comes to mind. Yeah, mine I think was at a pretty similar time. And I remember watching your videos at the time and being like, it's not just me. Because you spoke about it a little bit, and I made a video when I was at my stretched thinnest, I'll call it, and was like, I'm burnt out. I'm so overwhelmed. I just spent the last month of my life doing, committing all of my free time to nothing but getting this freaking garden planted, because we both have massive gardens.
Mm-hmm.
And something specifically at that time, that wasn't my first year on the homestead. That was my second year, my second growing season, really. I had been here for a little over a year. And the reason that felt particularly stressful was because I was doing it by myself for the first growing season. So the first year that I was here, I moved here with a partner, worked with him for the first 6 months, and then we ended up breaking up. He still lived here for a while, and then he left. And so there was just an uncertainty, like, in my heart of, okay, can I do this by myself? And I feel much more confident in that now. But in that moment, it was, oh my gosh, what have I done? Like, I've committed to this lifestyle that takes so much to maintain. And I was so intimidated about the newness of taking it on by myself. And yeah, just not giving myself the rest that I needed, because I'm so, so bad at that. When there is something that I want to get done, like planting a garden, because I'm excited about it, I get severe tunnel vision about it. And so I will just throw myself at it. I won't pay attention to when I'm hungry. I won't pay attention to when I'm thirsty. I won't pay attention to when I need sleep. I won't pay attention to anything else. I hyperfixate on that thing, which, when it's a task that takes a few hours, is one thing. When it's a task that takes a month, it it goes into unhealthy territory. So yeah, that is definitely the most burnt out, the most overwhelmed I have been homesteading. And now I'm not in an entirely different situation. I'm in a very similar situation, but I feel so different about it. I don't feel anywhere close to that degree of overwhelm that I did last year.
I definitely it's not sympathize. I definitely empathize with that, because it's a little bit different. Obviously, like, Taylor's here and he helps me with a lot of stuff, but last year it felt like I was doing the garden completely on my own, and I pretty much was. The only thing Taylor touched in the garden last year, and this is not me dissing him, he was busy on his own projects. He was doing the coop on his own. I barely touched the coop. So I was doing the garden, he was doing the coop, but it felt like impossible to do that garden on my own, starting it from complete scratch, trying to till and get everything set up. Literally, the only thing Taylor helped with in the entire garden last year was setting up the cattle panel trellises. And I think he might have tilled, like, part of one bed one time. So everything else was on me. And that is so daunting at the scale that we are doing things, let alone, like, trying to just squeeze it in 2 nights and weekends, let alone trying to film it and edit videos on it as well. That's a lot to take on for anybody. And I get the same exact way, where not only will I hyper focus on something, but I also, like, when I try to sleep, my brain doesn't turn off and it thinks about it all night long. Even when I'm sleeping, I'm, like, partially awake thinking about things in my head and about that specific thing. It's ridiculous. I think that's probably part of, like, neurodivergence things that are happening in my brain. I don't know about for anybody else, but for me, like, that's definitely part of it. But when I think of the stress that I had at that point in time, pretty much the entire last year since that time has been me trying to work towards, like, mitigating the consequences of that overwhelm and try to do things a little bit differently this year.
Going into this year, I mean, it's early May when we're recording this. We've started planting our gardens. It's not done yet, and so we're still kind of staring down the barrel of this season. Do you feel like, one, that this year is going to be more manageable, and two, do you feel like the work that you put in that first growing season, you're able to capitalize on, and I don't know if do less is the right way to phrase that, but do you feel like the work that you invested in last year helps make this year a little easier?
Okay, so quick answer for the part 2 of that question is yes. What was the part 1 again?
Do you feel like this year is more manageable?
Yeah. Okay, so like I said, this entire past year has been me trying to make sure that this year will be more manageable, and I've mentioned it like a few times now. It feels like the garden is it's still stressful. It's a lot less stressful because I have Taylor to help me this year, and because we have been implementing things like the mulch and relaying out some of our beds because they just didn't work exactly how I was hoping for them to last year. And so we're trying some new things this year that I think are going to make it a little bit easier. And already the mulch has made the biggest difference. I haven't had to water and the weeds are significantly less. And I'm hoping that kind of, like that trend continues throughout the summer. Oh my gosh. So yeah, definitely feels more manageable this year. And I don't know if it's specifically for like the mulch and the fact that the beds were already mostly laid out already, or because I have Taylor to help me more this year. I don't know. And I guess I don't know, like I won't know the answer to that just because like those things are both happening at the same time. For the second part of that question, do I think what I did last year made this year a little bit more manageable? I do. Like I said, the beds were already laid out. I was able to, at the end of last gardening season, I already had in my brain in like September, October, where things were going and how things were going to move around in the garden this year. Because I was like, this worked, this didn't work. I want to try this. Let's switch things up in this specific way. I laid it out when the garden was still fresh in my brain. And I think that's going to make a huge difference. So, not to say that we haven't put in as much work this year. I think we have put in a ton of work still with adding the mulch, adding a bunch of compost and soil to the beds, and like changing a few of the layouts around. But it is so much easier than last year, I think, mentally, because I'm not trying to figure out where things are going to go, get those beds set up, and then also plant the things. I have the plan. There's like an actual goal and vision for the garden now. And last year it was like the garden wasn't there yet. I was putting the garden in. And so like the visual aspect of it already being there really helps me. Okay, so you're going into growing season number 3 on your property. I'm curious if you had a similar experience last year where it was a little bit easier than the first year, and if this year feels like an improvement on the past couple of years.
I feel like last year, specifically with the garden, was not easier. Like I was still doing all the same things because the first year I did 2.5-foot wide beds or 3-foot wide beds, basically the width of a broad fork. And then last year I expanded the beds, so I basically broad forked every other pathway, but then I also re-broad forked all the rows that did exist previously. And I hadn't really put wood chip mulch down the first year, so that was a big effort. The second year was getting like basically half of the garden wood chip mulched. I didn't get all of it done last year. I'm finishing that effort this year. And also lining my beds. One, so I can tell what was a garden bed last year and what wasn't, because I have my animals in there, right? And two, just as like a border for weeds and stuff. I feel like going into this third year, I'm like, holy how? This looks so different. So I finally feel like the garden is switching more to maintenance instead of building, which are two very different tasks. To build a garden versus to maintain a garden. Very, very different. I finally feel like I'm switching more into maintenance mode. Again, I just talked about I'm gonna have to frickin' dig up half, trenches in half of it and pour sand there. So it's still a work in progress. But beyond just the garden, like, yes, the month of May is particularly stressful because there's that extra task, but there's also the animals. Like in late April, usually, and also in May, I'm getting batches of chicks. So typically I get a batch of meat birds end of April, beginning of May. And so there's that to keep up with. And because they're meat birds, they grow really fast. And so it's making sure that I feed them and keep water in there. And sometimes I got to do that like twice a day if they're eating crazy. And then I got to keep track of, okay, they've outgrown the brooder, or okay, the next batch of birds is coming in, on Thursday. So these guys have to move to the chicken tractor so that there's room in the brooder, and then I gotta clean stuff so that there's no cross-contamination, and then also I have the lambs that I'm bottle feeding, and I also have to keep the sheep moving, and I also have to keep the existing, laying flock moving. So spring is also when, things are changing from, at least in my setup, the more stagnant animal management things. I just had my sheep and my chickens in the garden space for months, and I didn't really have to worry about moving them because there just isn't that parasite pressure, and I was trying to keep them off the pasture anyway so that the pasture seed could grow. But now I want them on the pasture. I want to keep them moving because it's warm. There is more of that parasite pressure. I do want them eating that food source. And so all of that combined, plus then the extra task of getting every single thing planted out in the garden. That is why spring is so crazy on a homestead.
And next year, are you going to have milking?
Fingers crossed. I mean, I hope so, right? Like, that's the plan. Again, you never know what's going to happen, but yeah, that's why I got the ram lambs that I got this spring, so that hopefully the ewes that I got as lambs last year, they can get bred this fall, which would mean milk ideally in March or April next year, which is 2025, which will be a whole new thing, right, that I'm keeping up with.
Your bees
Oh
this
yeah, I
year?
also have bees. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's mental Tetris and physical Tetris. You got to figure out where things are going, what's happening. That's why I live by my Asana board. And I don't even have that much to manage. We just have the chickens and the ducks, and they're stressful in different ways.
Right. Yeah, I feel like every other week you're contending with some sort of sick animal, which is stressful in a whole different way.
Yep. I don't know if it's because we're just kind of still in the first few years of homestead things on our specific properties, or if it's just a homestead thing in general where like this time of year never gets any easier or never gets fully like streamlined. But it's definitely very, very hectic, and we don't even have a lot of animals yet. And I might have said this last week, but my new thing is saying later this year we're doing this. So I'm like, okay, later this year we might get goats. Later this year we need to put a wood stove in so we're not freezing all winter and our electric bill's not $400. Later this year we're gonna build the deck on our chicken coop. Later this year we need to buy a mini excavator so we can waterproof our foundation finally. Later this year we want to do more trees in our orchard, but we can't do that until we have a mini excavator because we need to put more berms in down there or else they'll get flooded out. So like it just piles on where there's a lot of stuff that we could be doing right now, but I have a running list where like it just gets pushed to next month or next week when things don't happen, and like sometimes it gets pushed to next year. that's okay. We were supposed to get goats this spring. We were thinking we were going to get bees this spring, and that's just not happening. And it's okay. I'm glad we didn't, because I could not handle that right now. There's too much going on.
Yeah, and I mean, there's also just general life, not even homesteading or gardening or keeping chickens or whatever you do. Like, life in general is just hard to keep up with. And so there's so many ways that that can show up, and it's going to be different for everybody, of course. But this is how it shows up for us because we have weird hobbies. So,
This is also the time of year where I am sort of, I don't want anybody to take this the wrong way. I love my family. I love my friends. I am sort of happy that I don't have a lot of people that I know here that want to consistently hang out with me. Like, Sage, I would hang out with you all the time if we were not, one, an hour away from each other, and two, constantly always so busy. But like,
I know.
that's like, we get along well because we both recognize how much we each have going on, and it's okay. Like, low maintenance friendships. But I'm so glad that I don't have like family members asking to constantly like hang out with me. Not that I wouldn't say, yes, come help me with the garden and things like that. But I'm glad that I don't have people asking me to go out and do things all the time, because I hate saying no to people, and I hate disappointing people. And so like being in my own little bubble here kind of makes it a little easier.
Yeah, I mean, I have had to give the disclaimer. I mean, to people in my life just in general, it's like, hey, if I don't get back to you in a couple days, like, this is just me doing me. But especially this time of year, it's mainly Chrissy that I hang out with because she's close. And she knows that if she texts me and I don't text her back for a week in late April, May, that's just me trying to keep my head above water with all the things that I have to do. And she's very good about it now. She's learned me, because not only am I just an emotionally avoidant person sometimes in general, also I'm just so busy that I don't have the mental or emotional energy.
Yep. Same with me. It's like you'll get 6 texts from me, and then you reply, and I won't reply for 3 days, and it's fine. That's just how it is, and it's okay. That's just how it has to be right now.
So, when you started your homestead, did you go into it knowing that you were basically going to push yourself as hard as you could push yourself, to the brink of overwhelm, to the brink of burnout? Was that sort of accepted and acknowledged going into it? Or has it surprised you how quickly all of those tasks build up and it kind of took you by surprise?
I think that just as a person, I hate this word, and I don't like this about myself, so let me start with that. I'm always busy, and I've always been busy. Like, in grade school, I was up until midnight or 11 p.m., like as a second, third grader with homework. Like, I've never not in my lifetime like been relaxed. So I'm always doing something all the time. Even before we moved to the homestead, I was doing gardening and stuff, and I'm just like very good at filling my time with hobbies and keeping myself busy. So like before we moved here, I was constantly cooking if I wasn't working or doing homework or school or whatever. So like I've always been busy. I don't think it's ever even occurred to me in my brain that like this would be something that's too hard or too much to take on, because I don't have that connection in my brain where like I'm like, I want to do this, and so I'm going to do this, and I'll figure it out. So I guess no, I didn't. I don't know. I did come into it thinking, okay, I have all of these ideas, all of this stuff I've studied and watched videos on and learned over the past few years, and like I'm gonna put it into practice. And we are. It's a lot, but I don't know. There's nothing, especially with how much Taylor knows, like, how much stuff he knows how to do. There's nothing in my brain where I'm like, we can't do that. Maybe that's a false confidence, but especially with him, because he's so smart with tools and building things, I just get ideas and then somehow we manifest them. They happen.
You have that. How hard could it be, Jean?
Yep. Not even how hard can it be.
I relate.
It can't be that hard. That's my Jean.
For me, going into the biting off starting a homestead, I knew. I was like, I am going to push myself as hard as I can. Definitely for the first year, probably for the second year, and then third year, like, can maybe start slowing down a little bit. So I did that. I definitely did that. I have basically done almost nothing but build this homestead and work for the last 2 years. And that's because I was excited about it. It's because, this is the hardest I'm ever going to be able to push my body, probably because I'm only going to get older. And it was like, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it. And now I'm looking to kind of change that pace because that's not sustainable, at least for me. I'm also someone who has, keeps himself busy, and I don't look at many things and go, oh no, can I do that? I'm like, I got it. And so, yeah, homesteading has been a humbling experience. But also I'm looking forward to evolving with it and seeing some of the payoff from the physical and emotional investment in those first couple years that I put in some really, really cool ways. Fingers crossed.
Okay, so question on that. Are you trying to get away from obviously putting all that effort in, like so much of yourself into it constantly, because it's less exciting to you now? Or is it just because you're like finding your groove with it?
I wouldn't say that it's less exciting. I would say that, yeah, the things that I am excited about shift. So like when I first got here, I was like, oh my gosh, this land is mine. I get to do whatever I want with it. And it's more or less, I've figured out the puzzle pieces of what's gonna go where. And so there's not so much the excitement of, oh, it can be anything I want. I'm kind of like, all right, well, I invested the energy in that. Like, that is the garden now. I'm not changing that. But now the excitement is I get to mess around with this new animal. I got bees this year and I get to learn that. That's so cool. That's another building block. And as you add animals, as you add garden spaces, it's not only that animal or that project, it's also how it interacts with the other animals that you already have, right? Like when I added the sheep to the pasture, that was a huge deal, not only because it took mowing off of my plate, but now I have the chickens on the pasture making the grass healthier and more nutritious for the sheep because they're fertilizing it. But now I've also got the sheep mowing down the grass so that the chickens don't, because chickens don't love super tall grass. So, they can follow the sheep now. They can find all the flies and the larvae and all the goodies that they love and all the bugs that are there after the sheep leave, and have their ideal setup. And yeah, the scraps from the garden can go feed the chickens. That's everything intertwines if you're into, these permaculture setups that are meant to intertwine.
I was just thinking about that earlier today when I was putting the seeds for the like squash and pumpkin seeds in the ground. I was like, okay, and I'm gonna mulch this with the duck hay or the duck straw, and like it's gonna fertilize it, but it's also gonna keep the weeds away. And I saw that you did that in your little garden tour with your mucked out run-in shed. And it's just really cool to see those building blocks like fitting together and like starting to see some of the circularities, the circular nature of things.
Yeah, I mostly just got tired of pushing wheelbarrows full of heavy wood chip mulch up that gravel access through the pasture into the garden. So I was like, I'm just gonna move some hay for a minute. This will be nice and light compared.
Hey, it's a good solution still, though, and it works. All right, we have been talking about our experiences for a little bit, and by a little bit, I mean an entire hour at this point. Let's try to give some actual advice for how to kind of manage burnout. So, like I said, I went into this kind of knowing that no matter what the experience was, what was happening, I was just going to do it. Even though I did a ton of research, I just like went in with that mindset. And I do think that helped me, but I think that I did underestimate the amount of probably more mental stress that it would have on me than necessarily the physical stress. Because it's not just like I could walk out there and plant seeds. You know, like this place was abandoned for an entire year or more before we got here. We had to not only mow, but then deal with the clay and set up beds and bring in compost and all of the things. So it's not just like literally walking onto the property, poking your finger in the ground, popping a seed in, and like harvesting things. There's a lot more that goes into it than that.
Right. I think no matter what it is, homesteading, gardening, whatever, knowing what you're getting yourself into, like really taking the time to do the research about it is going to set you up so much better than just going in blind. You can only really know what you're into when you're in it, right? It's never, I'm of the mind that you're never going to be perfectly prepared, that there is no such thing as perfectly prepared unless you never do it. But doing your research is a huge part of setting yourself up for success, for sure.
So I think I did my research on the homesteading aspect of this. But for like our situation, when we moved here, we were living in our camper and also demolishing the entire inside of our house and the roof and trying to put that back together while also starting the garden and trying to plan like where things were going without having access to a lot of it because it was so overgrown. So I do think that like what you said, where you're never going to be perfectly prepared, like sometimes you just have to throw yourself into it. And like I work okay that way. I can function that way, not for long periods of time. And that is like a matter of burning out at some point. But it's worked out so far for me. Like we said at the beginning of this episode, we're not good at this whole topic. We're works in progress.
For sure. I think one of my biggest limitations in setting myself up for success is I tend to not give myself a buffer. I tend to plan on me executing it perfectly, which is so unrealistic. And so one of the lessons that I've had to learn is planning for a buffer. If I think it's going to take me a week to get the garden planted out, I'm going to count on it taking at least a week and a half, if not a little bit more. And if I think that getting the pasture reseeded into a good place is going to take, a year to get it transformed, count on it taking 2 years. Just because life happens. Nothing is going to go to plan. Again, no matter how hard no matter how hard you research, no matter how many things you take into consideration, life is going to happen. And it's not a reflection on any of us being bad at anything. That's just how it goes.
That just reminded me. So I have also had to learn a similar lesson to that. And it's not necessarily because not necessarily just because life happens, but especially when Taylor and I are working on things together. I'm definitely more of the like, I don't mind doing the manual labor of things. Like, he's very good at the skilled labor. I'm very good at the manual labor. So like I'm usually the one like shoveling or mulching or whatever, and he's like figuring out how things go together. But things take longer when we work together than if I were to do things by myself a lot of the time. Because he is a lot more precise and does things, he likes to do things the right way, where I'm like, let's get it done and move on because I have 74 more things to do. Not necessarily a bad thing, but yeah, I'm not good at planning buffers. I load myself up with like 40 things on my to-do list every day and never get them all done.
Which actually goes pretty well into the next point, which is understanding how you, as a person, how you work. Because how I work is going to be different from how Mickayla works, which is going to be different from how Taylor works, which is going to be different from how you work. We are all our own people. We're all going to be a little bit different. So, for example, do you work better and faster when people are helping you, or do you just find that distracting? Does it actually end up going slower? Do you need to take frequent shade, water, food breaks, or do you hyperfixate like me and forget that your body has actual needs and you just get tunnel vision? Do you, you know, do you get so much tunnel vision that you need to make yourself take breaks so that you can actually work longer into the day, have better endurance instead of just crashing your blood sugar and then you gotta, recuperate on the couch for the evening where you could have been planting if you had just gone a little slower.
Another thing to add to this for us specifically, and maybe others who are content creators, something that you also have to take into consideration is how you work on the project at hand, but also, are you filming that? Because that completely changes how I do things. Not only like the process of it, but it also sometimes changes like what I wear, because I'm a lot more comfortable in shorts and a tank top or shorts and a sports bra, but nobody wants to see me in shorts and a sports bra on YouTube.
I mean, people do, but I don't think you want them to see it.
I don't think they
That's
do.
a different thing.
So yeah, especially when we're like out in the garden or like doing manual labor, like moving around in front of the camera and stuff, that is something that if you're not a content creator, you might not think about that and it might not apply to you. But if you are, that really affects, and it really affects how I work and how I need to work. And it has made me understand like my process of doing things a lot more as a human.
Yeah, if I'm filming something, one, I'm gonna wait until the weather is good to film it. I can't do it at noon. I have to do it when the light is good to film, which means, changes in the time of year, but somewhere between 4 and 7 most of the year. And then it's a question of, okay, can I get the whole thing done in that time? Do I need to plan on it being a multiple day thing, or do I need to like change the way that I'm filming it? Do I just do it as a fly on the wall perspective versus explaining things? There's so much that goes into it when you bring in the filming aspect of it. But yeah, most people aren't out here filming themselves in their gardens.
I don't know. You should be, even if it's just for yourself. I love looking back at videos and pictures of the garden from last year. Yeah, like for me, it's not a question of whether I'm filming if it's 95 degrees and it's noon. I'm still going to be filming. It's just a matter of like, I'm going to sit in the shade and talk to the camera first, and then I'm going to set the camera up and focus on what I'm doing, because I'm going to be like sweating, literally dripping sweat, and just like having a hard time breathing and not going to be able to talk to the camera. So you're going to get like a time lapse. And so like those are just weird things you have to think about. Like maybe I'll have to do a voiceover instead of actually talking to the camera because I'm out of breath. It's a weird world. It's a weird way to approach the world. But I just wanted to bring that up because that is something that I personally have to consider. And I know that there are a lot of people who are content creators and homesteaders, and it is something you have to work around.
For me, I feel like this whole process has forced me to get to know myself and like my own body rhythms better. For example, I know that if I try to wake up early, force myself to get outside early to hopefully get more stuff done, I'm going to shoot myself in the foot because my natural, most energetic is from like 3 p.m. all the way until about 8, and then I kind of hit a slump, and then I pick up again at like 10, unless I'm really tired. If I've worked my butt off, I'm exhausted at 10. But knowing that allows me to, let myself enjoy my slow mornings without feeling guilty about it or rushed about it. Because I know that at the end of the day, if I allow myself that peace in the morning, then I'm going to actually get more done than if I were to try to just like force my way through it. Because if I start in the morning, then I'm tired when my body naturally picks up, and then I never hit my stride. It's just always zigging when my body's zagging.
So for us, I think it's taken this entire year and a half to kind of get into this groove and like actually sitting down and surveying like what works for us and what doesn't work for us and figuring out a schedule and like trying to follow it that is going to set us up for the most success. It's not perfect, but we do the same thing where we're both kind of night owls too. We don't do well super early, but especially Taylor, he has to get up at like 6 or 5:30 for work and like go to work. I could not do that. I don't know how he does that. So like he'll come home and sometimes he just needs to take a nap and like it's okay. But on weekends specifically, we try to like shoot the middle there where we're not forcing ourselves to get up early, but we also are trying not to sleep in too late, because if we do either of those things, the whole day is ruined. Like if we get up early and we're tired, if we get up early and try to go push ourselves to do stuff too early in the day, usually the rest of the day is shot because we're just like exhausted. And if we sleep in too late, like way late, then we don't have the motivation or energy because we slept too long and we're like sluggish the rest of the day. So it's really hitting that balance. But I work well at night, specifically on like computer things and or cleaning. If I have to do cooking at night, I'm not happy. And obviously, if it was light out at nighttime, I'd probably also try and be out in the garden. But that's not an option. We've really tried to work in to the future. We haven't quite gotten to this point yet, but it's starting this weekend because we're going to do something this weekend. And I'm also going to be planting things, but we have decided like we need to try and get out and do like a date day or something like once a month where we either go see you or go visit other friends or just like go for a hike, because we have so many things like in this new area where we live that we want to go do, and we've been here for a year and a half and have not done them because we've only been working on homestead things. And I'm like, I don't want to be like 50 years old and be like, I really wish we had gone on that hike. Like I don't want to regret. I shouldn't have said 50. I mean like 90. I could probably go on a hike at 50 still. At least I hope so.
Yeah, I mean, I feel similarly. There's a huge reason that I'm here next to the Blue Ridge Mountains, and it's because they're gorgeous and I like to spend time in them, but I can count on one hand the number of times that I have set aside time to go hiking. Whereas, when I was in Colorado and I didn't have a homestead, I was hiking, getting on a trail every single weekend, sometimes twice a weekend. But again, that goes back to like, I knew the first year, probably the first 2 years that I was here, I was going to be absolutely busting my butt. And that I would rather do that, go really intense for the first 2 years and sacrifice everything else, but get a ton done in those 2 years, than stretch that out over 5 years and go slower, go more manageable, because I don't have that setting. We talk about that a lot.
No, and we're the same way. Like we said that initially that we were gonna still try and do like a hike once a month or something, and it never happened because we were so excited and pumped up at the beginning to just go, go, go. And like, that was fine. I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing. But we're to the point now where we really are looking to embrace rest a little bit more and like trying to be better at making time for it and not just like relying on the little bits and pieces that we might accidentally get a rest here and there, like, you know, on a rainy day occasionally where I'm like, I don't feel like doing anything today, so like let's just hang out on the couch. That does not happen very often, and so we're trying to like build that into the schedule.
Yeah, it's difficult for me to recognize that rest is not a reward, that rest is actually a critical part of the cycle of productivity. That you cannot, we're not robots. You cannot be endlessly productive without rest. We're human beings, not designed to go 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. That's just not what it was meant to look like.
And I honestly think that like the last year and a half or more, honestly, I have been in go, go, go mode. Like there's been not any rest. And I've been so bad. We kind of talked about this in the last episode about staying up till midnight, 2, 3, 4 a.m. a lot. I do that often. And over the last 2 or 3 months, I've really, really tried to stop doing that so much. Like it still happens occasionally where I have a night where I stay up later than Taylor. But I've been trying so hard to be better about like getting my stuff done, getting my shit together, and like working really hard during the day so I can actually try and sleep at night. I'm still bad at sleeping, but trying to incorporate.
Something else that I've had to learn in this whole process is setting manageable goals instead of unrealistic sky high goals. Because when I don't reach those astronomical goals, then I get upset. I may still have kicked butt that day and gotten an impressive amount of work done, but if I didn't reach that arbitrary bar that I set for myself, then there's this air of like, ugh, that sucks. Like there's this disappointment associated with it where it doesn't need to be. And again, homesteading's been a humbling process. I am not someone who frequently encounters things that I can't get done quickly and relatively easily. Like, I don't know. I think I'm a person who can think critically and I'm physically capable, but oh my God, so much of this takes so much more time and physical energy and mental energy and all the things that you've talked about earlier to get done. So yeah, that's been a huge part of the learning process for me, setting smaller goals.
I think that it helps when you have bigger goals too, because then you can kind of break them down into smaller goals. But I'm also very bad at taking like the bite-sized chunks of things. I just really, like we've mentioned so many times in this episode already, we just both get tunnel vision and really want to achieve the goal. And I think that's just, I mean, I know for me that's something that was like taught to me. Like I know that's not necessarily just my personality. That's something that I learned from a young age. Like always be like achieving things, and that is not a good thing necessarily in my mind anymore.
Yeah, not to vilify larger goals. You can have larger goals, right? But then the adjustment is set a realistic timeline.
Mm-hmm.
Give yourself more time to get all that done instead of expecting to plant 6 rows in your garden in one day.
Yeah.
Plant 6 rows in your garden in a week,
I think the way that I've kind of mitigated that is if I have a big goal that's like a short-term thing, I just don't give myself an expectation on a timeline. Not necessarily like, I'm like, okay, I need to have it planted within like the next month. I'm like, it's gonna get planted whenever it gets planted. I'll do it, but I don't know when. And that, like, I've tried to adjust my brain to work better that way, where I don't get as frustrated with that. Like, I'm like, okay, I have a lot on my plate. It's gonna get done, maybe, and we're gonna just do it whenever we can.
So let's talk about some more concrete things, not just concepts, but concrete things that we have done to accommodate these additional demands on our time and our energy, things that help us manage the burnout in real ways.
The first one of these that comes to my mind, and I don't think I picked the right week to do it, is meal prepping things ahead of time. I kind of shot myself in the foot with that one this past week, but in the past, I've had a good track record with this working out for me. And I mean, in general, we are canning and freezing food throughout the summer and using it later in the year anyway, so that's sort of its own version of meal planning, prepping. But I am very strict about doing this because it's the only way that we actually will eat food throughout the week. If I don't plan it, it's not happening, even on like a weekly basis. But meal planning ahead, or meal prepping ahead of time and freezing stuff or whatever for later, is also a really, really good way to kind of ease things, especially in the spring and summer when things are crazy. Or we have told you a million times on this podcast that if things get too crazy, it's okay to eat out. You don't have to be perfect about eating homegrown, homemade food. It's fine. A little Domino's isn't going to hurt you. It really isn't. You're fine. I promise.
Yeah, I mean, the absolute last thing that I want to do when I've been outside all day working on whatever I've been working on in the heat is spend an hour figuring out what to cook, actually cooking it, and then sitting down and eating it. Oh my gosh, that is so overwhelming at the end of the day. And it's such a lifesaver to either say, like, whatever, I'm just gonna go drive into town, grab something, or to have something in the fridge, warm it up, and eat it. That makes such a difference for me.
You forgot a critical piece to that whole process, and that is cleaning up, and that is the worst part. In my opinion.
That's why I just put it off. It's tomorrow Sage's problem. Or next week Sage's problem.
See, I do that too, but then it's like, okay, well, I have to clean up before I'm exhausted. I have to clean up before I cook myself something, and then I have to eat, and then I have to either put it off so I have more things to clean tomorrow, or I have to clean double tonight. And it just never is a good time. Yeah, just get Domino's.
Something else that saves me a lot of stress is maintaining a list. I know, Mickayla, you love Asana. I am someone who likes things written down. So I have a whiteboard in my kitchen that has a list of, hey, here's the seasonal projects that I'd like to get done. You know, here's my short-term to-do list, and anything that really needs to get done gets an asterisk next to it. I also have, content ideas on there. I have my running grocery list so that I am not constantly in the background running this list of 800 things that I'm trying to remember. If I have an easily accessible place where I can just throw that thought down when I think of it, for me, that's a whiteboard in my kitchen. For you, it might be a list on your Google Docs or, whatever works for you. If you're anything like me, removing the stress of trying to remember all those things is going to be a huge favor to yourself.
I also have a physical planner, and I really like writing things down too, but I have figured out that, especially with me and Taylor trying to manage all of the things together, it saves me a lot of mental space and stress, and like it actually helps me sleep better to have it on Asana, like digitally, so that he can see it too. So he's not texting me and asking me like, hey, what are your plans for the night? What do you need to get done tonight? What do I need to get done tonight? What are we having for dinner? Anything like that. Like he can just look on our Asana board and knows all the answers to that. So I also like that we can, like, if I have 20 things on my to-do list for today and I know, like, at the end of the day, I'm not going to get to 3 of them, I just move them to tomorrow or whatever day I have free, and, like, it's still there, and I don't have to remember that I need to do that on a different day. That, the mental load that removes is insane. Like, Asana, you can use whatever list, app, whatever. Writing things down and getting them out of your brain is life-changing. Like, at least for me. I overthink everything. I'm constantly, like, worried that I'm forgetting something, and that has changed my life.
Yeah, I don't have to accommodate a partner, so I don't have anybody asking me what the schedule is. But when I did have a partner here, what really helped was saying, okay, you're gonna own this. Like, we don't have to go back and forth about, like, hey, what did you do? Where do I have to pick up? What needs to get done on what time? I'm like, you own the meat birds. Like, you just do everything to do with the meat birds. I'll do everything to do with the laying hens, and then, like, we're not tripping over each other. And I mean, it still requires communication. But I found that helpful.
Yeah, for us, it's a lot of the reason he was asking a lot of the time is because we film so much and such random things that we're doing that he wants to know if he needs to film something, or like if I'm planning to film that night and he needs to help me with stuff. So, like, that adds another level to it too, where he's like, okay, if you're going to be editing tonight, or if you're going to be filming this specific thing, like, what can I be doing to contribute in a different way, you know? So that adds a lot to it. That's a lot of why we need the organization to keep on track with filming things. But yeah, it's definitely helped a lot to have something where we can both just look at it and it doesn't have to stay in just my brain. And also, he's really bad at remembering things, so it's just helpful in that, in general, for that. So something that I kind of said about, like, incorporating rest earlier with specific hiking dates or a day a month where we're gonna go plan to do something off the homestead together. Taking a day off, whether that's taking a day off on a weekend and leaving your homestead, or it's taking an actual, like, PTO day from work if you have that option. I do this a lot in terms of, I'll take a day off if I need to get more things done, and, like, work isn't going to happen that day, so I'm like, I need to get this done today, and I'm going to put this entire day towards my homestead things. But I also think that, like, that doesn't really contribute to managing your burnout so much as taking a day just to rest. Like, take a PTO day and actually do something that, like, rejuvenates you in any way. Whether that's, like, puttering around the garden and hanging out, but not, like, stressing yourself out more. I know that's a fine line.
Yeah, last year I took an entire week off of work to get garden prep and garden planting done. It was not enough time to get garden prep and garden planting done, but it did help me. You know, I got around to things that had been stressing me out for a long time, like going to the DMV and getting my license, because I let my Colorado license expire before I got my North Carolina license, and that was the whole thing. And then this year I'm giving myself a 4-day weekend, and granted, you know, I'm not just taking that time entirely off. I'm getting the pets to the vet and catching up on life stuff that falls off of my priority list because work comes first, homesteading comes first. You know, as a homesteader, there's an endless list of things to do. And so giving myself that extra time to just move slower. And, you know, just the luxury of not being in a rush, at least it's a luxury for me, makes such a difference in how overwhelmed I feel with things. And just knowing that it's a busy season and that I need to be more patient and more forgiving and give myself that buffer, super helpful for me. Something else that has been a game changer for me is actually making friends that are in the same sphere, especially when you're a homesteader, because, you might be able to ask almost anybody to, babysit your dog for a few days, but I can't go to just anyone and be like, "Hey, can you watch the sheep and the chickens and make sure the plants don't die in the garden and bottle feed the lambs and make sure the chicks that I have in the brooder don't die?" Like, when you're doing all these extra things that take knowledge that isn't necessarily commonplace, it can be really difficult. It makes it difficult to leave when you need to do, real life stuff, go visit family, go on a vacation, go on a work trip, whatever it might be. Making friends who are in that same sphere is invaluable.
Yeah, if not to like physically help you out, and I know that's like a total Chrissy shout out. Chrissy's the bomb.
Yeah, Chrissy is the only person that I trust in my homestead right now, other than you, but you're an hour away, and I'm not going to ask you to do that.
Like, if not to actually physically help you out, to give you advice on like what you could do if you needed somebody to come physically help you out, or if you have like questions about things. Where I text you all the time, I'm like, hey, is my chicken supposed to be doing this? Like, what? Hey, my chicken is has no skin on her back. Has this ever happened to you? That's an actual,
yes, it has.
That's an actual conversation we've had. And like, what do I do? That's very, very helpful. I don't necessarily know that like that specific version of this has anything to do with burnout, but I know with my stress levels, it's helpful to know that like I have a few people I could say, like I can text if I have an issue and be like, hey, have you dealt with this before? Like, what do I do?
Right. I mean, I have been in a situation where someone that I know was on vacation for family obligations. It wasn't vacation, but they had someone just coming and stopping by, making sure their chickens were okay, feeding them. And when they were gone, they had a bear break into their chicken enclosure and basically demolish their flock. And the person that they had stopping by didn't have the space to, just take the remaining flock of chickens. And so they called me and said, "Hey, is there any chance that you can go wrangle my chickens, that you have spare coop space to keep them, because I didn't want to integrate them with my flock just in case,
Yeah.
quarantining, it's a whole thing. Like, do you have the extra space to keep them? Do you have the time tonight?" Like, not everyone knows how to go and just like catch your chickens and transport them and do that whole thing. So it's having people who can help you out in a bind, again, for these things that you don't expect because life happens.
And honestly, even just having somebody to talk to, like we're an hour away from each other. We don't see each other very often, honestly, except for online. And like, this is like being able to just like vent for an hour before we start recording, once a week is helpful to me. it like,
But someone who genuinely gets it, right? Because you can vent to anybody and they're like, "Oh, that's crazy." But, when I'm like, I have to restart half of my tomatoes, you're like, "Oh," like you get it.
So we've already kind of talked a little bit about sleep. And at this point, you guys know I'm horrible at sleeping. I love sleep. It doesn't love me. But I already said I am trying to get better at going to bed earlier, and actually attempting to get my sleep, because for a year I was not sleeping nearly as much as I should have, and that started to really, really affect me. And like I said at the beginning of this, last late May, early June was like the peak of me being awake, trying to get things done. And like that was also a point, I didn't mention this earlier, that was also a point where I was so desperate about my job situation and being so frustrated with it, where I was trying to write an ebook at the same time as all of this and like redo my entire website and a whole bunch of other like branding and whatnot changes, getting things set up so that I could start making more money via like online whatnot. And so that's the point of the year where I was literally staying up till like 4 or 5 a.m. every single night and getting up for work at 8. And like that was a consistent thing, like almost at least a few days a week, if not like most days every week. I was getting like a few hours of sleep at night. And yeah, it doesn't work for a very long time. So get your sleep.
When I don't get my sleep, I have a really hard time emotionally regulating. Something minor will happen, and I'll be like, why am I so irrationally upset and angry right now? I'm like, oh, right, because I didn't get sleep and my body is all out of whack. Same thing with eating well, which before I homesteaded, I was great about. Since I've been homesteading, have absolutely not made time for. But I also find that that affects me. So between the sleep and what I'm eating, the emotional regulation and the like how resilient my body is physically with injuries or how hard I can push myself. I am feeling it after 2 years of not prioritizing those things, of sacrificing those things in the name of getting the homestead to a certain place. It's real.
Okay. Last question for you. If there was one thing that you could like implement or buy or just like have in place on your homestead, whether that's like a thing or like a system or just like streamlining something that could help you manage your burnout or like get rid of it, what would it be at this point in time? I'm sure this answer would change.
Does
in
it
the
have
future.
to be does it have to be a realistic thing or can it be like a
Whatever you want it to be.
unachievable thing?
Whatever you want it to be.
I mean, really, if I could clone myself and have 2 of me, that would be. But then I'd have to feed 2 of me, and so that's just more food. So maybe that
Well,
actually wouldn't work.
you'd have one of you to feed the 2 of you. You could put them on
Yeah,
that
I mean,
duty.
it's either clone myself or fast forward to 3 years from now where I'm not building things, I'm just maintaining them. Which is still a lot, but vastly different. Those would be my in a perfect but unachievable world. My realistic answer is I hate that this is my answer. I need to work through some things. My realistic answer is like genuinely a supportive partner who is actively part of this is honestly the thing that would make the biggest difference. Don't get me wrong. I am in many ways very happy doing this alone, but that's the
And
real
capable.
answer. That would make the biggest difference is another human who is here, interested in it, involved in it, invested in it.
Chrissy. Tell her to move into that tent.
I love Chrissy, but we would not work together well in that situation. We've had that conversation.
I can say that makes a huge difference. Like I don't think I would be having as good of a time doing this unless without Taylor here. Like we do work well together, and I think that makes a huge difference for me.
Yeah,
My
what's your answer? If you could change one thing, if you could have one extra thing or change whatever you want to reduce burnout the most, what would it be?
Okay, so like you, I'll have a fun answer. I don't know. It's not unachievable in the future, but like for now it is not in the cards. That would be that my job is the homestead. Like
That's a good
I
one.
am somehow making enough money and surviving like monetarily where I can just focus on the homestead and feeding us and whatnot. Stay-at-home wife. Which is not feasible whatsoever. Not even close. So that's my like out there answer. My realistic answer would be to kind of fast forward or get to the point where we have our excavator because that is kind of what's holding us up for a lot of projects right now. Like, we can't really do anything with the basement until that gets fixed, and we can't do anything on the exterior of the house until that gets fixed, until we have the excavator. We can't do anything in the front yard. We can't do our major, like, porch addition or, like, redo the laundry room, like, actually and add it onto the house, like, enclose it with the house, because we have to knock out the entire floor of the carport, like the ground of the carport and everything. We needed to do trenching all around the property for French drains because we have so much flooding. We needed to dig a pond. We needed to add more trees to our orchard because we need to add another berm. There's so many things like that would be helpful for. And I think that would really, like, get us a lot further with as little, like, manpower, manual labor as possible. So that's my realistic answer.
I hope that you all found this discussion helpful. And if you have any experiences where you've been burnt out and lessons that you've learned, or examples of real concrete things that have helped you that you want to share, please leave those down in the comments below.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of She Said Homestead. We hope you enjoyed our chat. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to hear from you. Send your homesteading stories to us at shesaidhomestead@gmail.com. We can't wait to share them on the air. To stay connected, follow us on Instagram for updates and sneak peeks at what's coming up next. If you like video podcasts, make sure you subscribe to the She Said Homestead YouTube channel too. We can't thank you enough for being part of the She Said Homestead community. Until next time, happy homesteading.